The Baltimore Ravens signed Kyle Hamilton to a massive extension on Wednesday, and John Harbaugh hinted there could be more on the way. We talk about that and so much more coming up on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Ravens. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your 5-day-a-week Ravens podcast, plus more. And on today's show, more jam-packed content to dive into. Obviously, the big news of yesterday was Kyle Hamilton signing a massive 4-year, $100 million extension with the Ravens. And John Harbaugh hinted there could be more on the way. So we'll dive into that. We'll also talk about the practice squad for the Ravens being officially set. Some surprises, but also not a ton of surprises. So we'll dive into that. Then we'll also just talk about the Ravens roster in general, players they lost to waivers. They could potentially add anybody after the latest news has dropped. So these are kind of the days right before we get into the regular season. We figure out what's going on. And I'm really pumped to dive into all of it here today. Thank you out there to all the everydayers, the first-time listeners. If you're somewhere in the middle, thank you as well. And also, of course, thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is sponsored by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code Locked On NFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Now, the Ravens, that Kyle Hamilton deal, it was a doozy. We'll get into the specifics of it now. We did a whole instant reaction to it yesterday, so if you missed out on that live, be sure you go check that out. 4 years, $100 million for Kyle Hamilton. $82 million of that deal is guaranteed. So he resets the safety market by about $4 million per season. It's a massive bump in pay raise for a safety. Now, Hamilton deserves that. He's a do-it-all player. He's been exceptional during his time in Baltimore, first 3 years in the NFL. He's someone that you can play all over the field. And so he, in my opinion, is different from a lot of safeties. And I know that a decent amount of safeties in today's game can play multiple different roles. Hamilton just does it differently. You know, Hamilton's just a whole different beast when it comes to that. You can play him in single high, play him in the slot, play him up at the line. You can play him in dime. You can obviously play him in traditional two high. Like every single thing that you want out of a player, Kyle Hamilton can essentially do that for you. So Albert Breer gave other notes on the deal. It was $48.023 million in fully guaranteed money. That $82.023 million is an injury guarantee of a $26.9 million signing bonus plus $43.5 million in the new money through the first new year. And those are all records for the position. So this was a deal that obviously the Ravens, Eric DeCosta and Kyle Hamilton, everybody wanted to get this thing done. They talked about that during their extension press conference, which again, I like that they did this. They announced a press conference and it was for news, and that's when they announced the deal. So that's a breath of fresh air. I wish the Ravens would do that from now on. But we know that Baltimore, it's not just Kyle Hamilton, right? There are a lot of other guys that need to get under contract. Obviously, I give the extension an A. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But now you turn the page and you figure out who is next on that docket. And John Harbaugh, he hinted, and honestly, saying it was a hint might honestly be an understatement because Harbaugh really went all in on saying this. He was asked about the Kyle Hamilton extension after practice on Wednesday, and he said, quote, well, I'm going to ask Kyle to pay for the ice cream truck today. First of all, that'll be his job. The Ravens players and coaches were treated to an ice cream truck after practice. That's the context there. But then Harbaugh said, quote, but I'm really happy for him. Obviously, very well deserved to be the highest paid safety in football at this point. He's earned it, and he's a guy that I don't think there's anybody that's surprised by that. I think everybody in the Ravens flock was hoping to see that happen, and that's not the end of it either. John Harbaugh saying that. That's not the end of it either. So, to me, this is about as blunt as you could say this from John Harbaugh. About, hey, we're not done with these extensions. Obviously, he has talked about other extension potential candidates in the past. Lamar Jackson obviously being one, and the Ravens clearly want to make him least from everything that you can infer, the highest paid quarterback in league history. So I guess the gears turn a little bit about, what could John Harbaugh be talking about? Is there another extension coming before the season begins for the Ravens? Now they have less than 2 weeks. It's about a week and a half now to do that. Once the season starts, I'm pretty sure they are going to probably table any extension talks. And honestly, Kyle Hamilton talked a little bit about that, saying that he wanted to get it done before the season so that there were no distractions. But, even Eric DeCosta mentioned that he's happy it's done before the season, and it's a great thing, DeCosta said. But we're going to go to the handy-dandy extension tracker here. I built an extension tracker of all the candidates that are up for an extension for the Ravens or are going to be up for an extension with the Ravens over the next handful of years. So we're going to talk about it. The Ravens, 3 extensions in the books, technically 4 if you want to count Ronnie Stanley, but he was a free agent at the time. So Derrick Henry, Rashod Bateman, and Kyle Hamilton, you can check those boxes off. They are all officially back in Baltimore. You still have to work with Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Tyler Linderbaum, Travis Jones, Odafe Owe, Marlon Humphrey, Jaire Alexander. Now you can add onto this list. I mean, there are a lot. Roquan Smith, if you want to look really, really far down the line, he still has 3 years left on his deal. Ravens have a lot of decisions to make here. Now, the 2 most likely, and again, I don't have any insider information on this, just, based off of, putting 2 and 2 together. Obviously, Lamar Jackson is going to be the most important one here. That $70 million cap hit for next year. You can't have that. So I think Lamar would ideally be the one that the Ravens get done next. Then I would prioritize Tyler Linderbaum. Now, the Ravens obviously declined Linderbaum's 5th-year option because he would have absolutely blown the center market out of the water with his 5th-year option by a decent amount per year. I believe that 5th-year option was around $23 million for 1 year. That's all fully guaranteed money on those options. Creed Humphrey right now is the highest paid center in the league at $18 million. So it would have set a massive precedent, and Linderbaum would have been able to bring that number back to the table when negotiating his real extension and being like, hey, I just got paid $23 million. I'm not taking a pay cut if you had another great season. So I think strategically that was the right decision. But in my opinion, and I've seen some controversy about whether Linderbaum should be back or not, I believe he should be. I think he's extremely valuable to the middle of that offensive line. And the Ravens they were missing a long-term center really since Matt Burke left. They'd gone through options, Ryan Jensen, but then he left, Skura, McCary, they were going through guys left and right. I know Jeremy Zutah, Linderbaum can be your center for the next 10 seasons, and you can feel really, really, really good about it. So I'd try to get Lamar and Linderbaum done before the season. Do I expect it to happen? Probably not. We might see one more extension. And look, we also know that the players on that extension tracker that I mentioned, not all of them are going to be in Baltimore long term. We know that the Ravens can't keep everybody. That's the problem. And essentially, Eric DeCosta admitted to it a little bit, where you just can't do it, right? So he makes it known that hey, in 2019 we're going to try to keep as much of our talent as we could. DeCosta said. He said, "quote We tried to do that, but we're in a salary cap league, and so that's the reality. As I've said 1,000 times, we can't keep everybody, and so unfortunately, you're going to see some good players probably in the next couple of years play for other teams. We've seen that. That's going to be something that continues." It's the reality. And I appreciate DeCosta again for being candid about that and real and upfront about it, because it's the truth. We've been talking about it here for a while. I don't expect Mark Andrews back in Baltimore after this season. I think Odafe Owe probably leaves if he has a year like Nnamdi Madubuike had in his contract year. You have to make tough decisions there. Zay Flowers, if he demands a $25 to $30 million per year contract, is that something you want to pay if you're the Ravens? I would pay him personally, but you have to find the room to do that, maneuver around things. And as players get older and those contracts come off the books, the Ravens probably have to choose between Jaire Alexander and Marlon Humphrey next season, or if they re-sign Jaire, is Marlon gone the year after? That's stuff that is not necessarily a now problem, because now you have the roster. You have a year with this group, as stacked as it is. That's why I continue to stress on this show how important it is to win this season, not because the Ravens won't have another shot if they don't. whenever you have Lamar Jackson, you have a chance. That's what Kyle Hamilton said during his press conference yesterday. And that's true. Whenever you have Lamar, you're going to have a shot to win the big one. But rosters like this do not come around often. So you have to take advantage when you have it. So to me, another extension will be great before the season. John Harbaugh making it very clear, hey, the Ravens aren't done yet in terms of this. I don't know if that means tomorrow, the next day after that. I mean, if something does happen, of course, we'll be live here on Locked On Ravens talking about it. But that Hamilton deal was one that a lot of people wanted to see because outside of Lamar Jackson, I believe he is the Ravens' next most important player. So, it's important to get a long-term building block like that. Hamilton now in Baltimore through 2030. So, you feel good about that. And plus, we've talked about it a ton here. I talked about it on the live yesterday. I'll mention it again here. This Hamilton deal is such a steal for so many different reasons. One of them being that the salary cap continues to go up. And with Lamar Jackson, when he signed that deal 2 years ago to become the highest paid quarterback in NFL history, everyone's like, that's such a rich deal. That's a massive amount of money. 2 years later, Lamar Jackson is the 10th highest paid quarterback in the NFL. Just 2 years later. For Hamilton, that deal will look better and better and better with every year that passes. And by the time that deal is up, we're going to talk about it. Like, how did the Ravens get him at that price point? How did they do it? So I think it's just a shrewd move from Eric DeCosta. Kyle Hamilton gets a deserved payday. It's a heck of a lot of money, and he earned that money. So coming up for the second part of the show, we'll move into the practice squad. It is officially set. Some surprises, but a lot of straightforwardness there. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot coming up on Locked On Ravens. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the daily fantasy platform that lets you turn your football predictions into real rewards. Preseason is already heating up and college football isn't far behind. Whether you've got your eye on big name quarterbacks or breakout running backs, PrizePicks makes it easy to get in the game. And for this weekend, PrizePicks is offering major max discounts if you want to get involved on the NFL side of things. Dak Prescott for that opening game against the Eagles, his max discount, that number, 0.5 passing yards. You got to get in on that. Plus, I'm super pumped for the NFL season here. So Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, the Ravens, I'm super pumped. And so PrizePicks is super simple to play. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. And if you get your picks right, you can cash in and win up to 2,000 times your money. And PrizePicks puts their members first. So all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 to play. PrizePicks, run your game. Continuing on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Thursday edition of the show. Almost 1 week away from Ravens football. I am absolutely pumped. We have all the coverage you need here on Locked On Ravens. We have it daily for you, Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time. Plus, of course, we go live after every single Ravens game, every single piece of Ravens big news. We have Locked On Ravens watch-alongs where we react every single play live. We have the Locked On Ravens squad show with myself, Sam Njoku, and former Ravens receiver Kadri Ismail. So everything you need Ravens coverage-wise, we got it for you on Locked On Ravens. Tell a friend, tell a family member. When we also just hit 14,000 subscribers on YouTube, that was my goal before the season. Appreciate everybody who helped me reach that. Next up, 15,000 plus in audio form. That community grows each and every single day, and I love to see the growth there. So thank you, whether you're a video watcher or an audio listener. Ravens practice squad officially set. We got the news kind of trickling in a little bit over the course of the live when I was doing it yesterday. We got some news of players getting claimed, others leaving for other opportunities, and obviously the Ravens bringing in some guys. So their full practice squad, I'll just read it off here, and then we'll talk about who didn't make it. Tyler Huntley, we'll just start off with him. Someone that obviously was in contention for that third quarterback spot for the practice squad, probably alongside Devin Leary. And I kind of mentioned on the show and on social media that it was probably going to come down to Devin Leary or Tyler Huntley. It felt it was the most obvious move ever. This was going to happen. So Huntley is back in Baltimore. And then you have Gerard Christian Lichtenhand, Thomas Graham, defensive back. You have Malik Ham, Keandre Jackson, defensive back, D'Ernest Johnson, Keith Kirkwood, Chandler Martin, he made it. Anthony Miller, Zaire Mitchell-Paden's on the practice squad. CJ Okoye made it back to Baltimore on the practice squad. Jared Penning, Marquise Robinson, defensive back. K'Mon Rucker, defensive end. Nick Samak made it back on. Lucas Scott, the fullback, And then Brent Urban, that one also very, very expected. So some names certainly that a lot of Ravens fans wanted to see. Myself, I wanted to see him as well. Obviously, CJ Okoye was a big one. Urban was another one. I think also for me, Chandler Martin was really good. I'm glad that he was able to get back on there. Malik Ham, another. But there are also some guys that unfortunately are no longer members of the Ravens. The Ravens had 3 players claimed, second highest total players amount claimed in the NFL. 3 players claimed on waivers. Jalen Armour-Davis, of course, I think everybody expected him to get claimed. He went to the Tennessee Titans, as did defensive lineman CJ Ravenel, who I think honestly flashed for them. I'm pretty disappointed he's not going to be on their practice squad. And then Bo Braid leaves Baltimore. He is going to New York. And the Giants pick up Bo Braid. A couple of other guys who I'm surprised aren't on the practice squad for the Ravens here. Garrett Dellinger, their 7th round pick, is not on the team or on the practice squad, as well as Darian Dalcour, who some people honestly liked better than Ben Cleveland. So I guess the Ravens didn't want them back, or maybe their agent said, hey, we want to try to find other opportunities. I'm not really sure. At the time I'm recording this, I don't think either of them were picked up, or even that I see have tryouts right now. I mean, there are certain fan bases are speculating about, oh, could their team pick these guys up? But it doesn't look like, from what I'm seeing, anybody is picking these guys up right now. So look, maybe that's the Ravens not liking what they saw. They opt to keep Jared Penning and Christian Lichtenhand over those 2 guys. But, this was my thing where if you were listening to me during the draft process, and like 3 undrafted free agents made this team. So I guess you can kind of count them within the draft class, but having the 11 picks that they did, there was always going to be that reality that was pretty likely that 11 draft picks were not going to make the roster. I said it over and over and over again, because you also had to kind of account for those undrafted guys, right? And said, hey, what if a guy or 2 steps up and we weren't these guys like Keon Martin, Ruben Lowry, Jay Higgins, they weren't necessarily on our radar. I mean, I like Jay Higgins in the draft process, so I was stoked they got him. But in terms of making the team, everyone was like, they're probably going to keep other guys. Like, everybody probably expected Jalen Armour-Davis to make the roster over Keon Martin. Well, Keon Martin was a guy that took that opportunity. So we were kind of wondering, and I'm just like, I probably would try to move off of some of that draft capital for future assets. They didn't do it. And we know Eric DeCosta's not shy about cutting draft picks that either he doesn't feel were worthy of making the roster, or he just feels like wasn't a great fit. Sometimes you draft those guys and, all of a sudden they get to your team and you're like, oh, this isn't what I saw on tape. So maybe that's what happened with those 2 guys. I'm not sure. Dalcour was obviously with the Ravens last season, so a little disappointing, I guess, that, he's departing. But even still, the Ravens, I like the practice squad. Again, it has solid veteran names, some young players that are really intriguing. I would probably expect the Ravens to possibly call up Zaire Mitchell-Patton for the first couple weeks of the season, with Isaiah Likely I'm going to say probably not being available. I'm not going to say not for sure, but I think week 1's a long shot for him. So I think they're probably going to bring up Zaire Mitchell-Patton, and then, maybe it is Kamon Rucker or Thomas Graham on game days to be able to go out there. Marquise Robinson potentially for the first couple of weeks. We'll see, but special teams value for sure for that second spot. I think that's probably where that goes. Maybe it's Keandre Jackson. Honestly, I think Keandre Jackson might get some run here and some call up. So, certainly the practice squad will be probably just moving around the entire season, guys coming, guys going. It's not going to be, total mayhem, but for now, I like what they did. Some disappointing names not on there, but sometimes you just can't control it. We knew that some of those guys were going to get claimed, and that is exactly what happened. So look, a lot of these roster decisions happen very quickly. There's a short turnaround for practice squads, and for Baltimore, their depth on the roster is so good, it is less imperative that they just have like star power on their practice squad. Not that they would anyway, but you do have a couple of names on there that you'd feel pretty confident calling up and making an impact for you from multiple different weeks. Coming up, though, in the final part of the show, would I have a little bit more into the Ravens roster analysis behind that, a little bit more about what John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta had to say reading into that. A lot more coming next on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Rugiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them, but if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. And you can even read real customer reviews on their site. It's helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet Ready website for full safety information. And the show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel's making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. And I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. You can do player props, building same game parlays, or even just jumping in live as the action unfolds. And it makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup, because it's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays. We know that the Ravens this season, man, there's going to be a lot of energy. You got Lamar Jackson, you got Derrick Henry, you got Zay Flowers, electricity all across the board. FanDuel can add a little bit more of that, a little more spice, which is absolutely great. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Again, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Continuing on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still talking Ravens football with you. Again, appreciate everybody for being here today. On this Thursday, no football this weekend, but we have football next weekend. The Ravens and Bills opening up in week number 1. Super pumped for everything we have planned. Again, we have the Locked On Ravens watch-alongs, followed by instant reaction shows after the game, followed by the squad show after the instant reaction on game days. Our regularly scheduled programming is Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern time. We go live after all the big news as well. So be sure to tell a friend, tell a family member if they want some daily Ravens coverage. We have them covered just like we have you covered over here on Locked On Ravens. But this Ravens roster, to me, I talked about it with Sam Njoku yesterday. We had him on the show, and it just feels like the perfect roster, all things considered. Like, again, that doesn't mean there wasn't a shock that Jalen Davis move still, to me, at least was a shock, considering how he played in the preseason. But you just have so many layers of a perfect roster here. And we talked about the Isaiah Likely situation and kind of what it means for him. Probably going to be inactive for the first couple weeks of the season. We don't know that, but that to me is kind of what I can take away here. And, you know, Eric DeCosta talked a little bit about the roster in itself and talked about the Jalen Davis move in particular and said that it was a tough one because he had a great camp. And in the end, it was just a tough decision. He said, quote, you have these younger players that you've probably had more control of long-term wise, contract wise, and then Jalen's in the last year of his deal. And he mentioned that as something that goes into it. And he said that the reality looking at it is I think Keon and Lowry, those guys played well enough to be on the team. So it's a tough thing. And honestly, he said that they agonized about that decision. And he's talked about the fact that it's a puzzle. And, you know, he said that he may feel really good about that today, but then they may feel really bad about it next week. And then they might also say next week, thank God we kept that player at that position because of the injury. So he said that, you know, before you play the games, you're not really going to know, which is certainly true. But at this point, he thinks that the thing that excites him the most is the special teams unit because of the young guys in important positions. He talked about Tyler Loop. He talked about LeJohntay Wester, the important spots those guys are in. And again, he didn't say anything. It was like, oh, if they don't perform, no, they're out of, they're on the first plane out of here. That's not what he said. But he said that they're the right guys to handle those jobs. He has a lot of confidence in them. The team's very excited about them. But we do know that the Ravens are competing for a Super Bowl, and those guys can't really afford to mess up in big moments. Loop has looked great throughout the course of the preseason, right? I have a lot of confidence in him. LeJohntay looked comfortable back there, fielding punts. And even just on his fair catches, he looked comfortable. So, it feels good about that. He also talked about the decision to only have Loop on the roster halfway through camp. They cut John Hoyland, and, he again kind of delegates that to Chris Horton, Randy Brown, John Harbaugh. They all felt like Loop was ready. So that allowed Eric DeCosta to feel confident enough to make the decision there. He didn't like to talk about the Isaiah Likely injury. That's not really a question that Eric DeCosta usually answers anyway, so it kind of is what it is there. That's usually a John Harbaugh thing, but DeCosta was asked about it, and he said, quote, "I don't like to talk about injuries much, but the fact that we didn't put Isaiah Likely on IR, I think speaks to when we can expect him back. I think he'll be back at some point in the early part of the season. I think his attitude's great. I see him. I spend time with him. I think he will be a really, really big part of our team this year for sure." Talked about Jay Higgins, talked about the loss of Bo Braid, and also talked about some of the extensions as well, where he is being proactive about making sure that these guys aren't going to hit free agency or even close to free agency. And he said he sort of equates it to the old game we used to play where it was the musical chairs game. You got a lot of really good players, and we're just trying to get as many guys signed as we can until we can't. Like, it's literally just go, 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 go. Try to talk about that stuff. And DeCosta kind of said he works in the dark with those types of things, talked about the potential Lamar Jackson extension, said that those talks are ongoing, said he likes to work in the dark quietly and try to get that as much done as he can in that circumstance because they got a lot of things going on, a lot of good players like I talked about there. And what he said, quote, "We'll continue to be aggressive, but we also understand that at some point we're going to see some good players leave." So kind of that messaging I was talking about earlier in the show, he stays consistent with that. And it's the right thing to say, in my opinion, right? I wouldn't want him to come up there and say, "Yeah, we're going to sign everybody," because everybody knows that's not true. But the honesty is important there. And I give Eric DeCosta a lot of credit for just coming out and not even dodging the question either. He straight up was like, "Yeah, it's just the reality. We're going to see some good guys leave." That to me, I really respected that answer there. He also, at least for John Harbaugh, let's move to John Harbaugh for a second because he also talked a lot about the 53-man roster. He said that he really likes the roster, and he said that when he's watching practice, he just says that's a really good football team. That's what goes through his mind, and he's now about taking one step at a time, figuring it out. He really liked the video of Eric DeCosta telling the undrafted guys that made the roster, and if you haven't seen that, go check it out. Really great video from the social team with the Ravens, and he said that for a guy like Keon Martin, who was a tryout guy, guys that didn't have any signing bonuses, it's pretty amazing to him. And, talking about the fact that, now that part of it's done. And he clearly, this entire press conference, wanted to turn the page and be like, "All right, let's go play some ball. Let's go win some games." That's what John Harbaugh's message was. And that's what it should be. You got week 1 against Buffalo again, coming up in less than 2 weeks. Exciting times in Baltimore right now. So Kyle Hamilton, you can check that box off. It is officially complete. Maybe we'll see another extension for the season. I'm not sure. But for now, the Ravens, they have the roster. They have the practice squad. And now it's time for them to step up to the plate and start winning some football games. So that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning into the show today. On the way out, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button in video form and follow along and subscribe in audio form for 5 days a week, plus more of that daily Ravens content and coverage. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be rounding out the week with another episode of the show. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.